that in Wales we all know each other, we're mostly related, which is another issue in terms of the way we behave. Now, in anticipation, we had these points, and I hope that you will agree that this can be the focus of the discussion. And the first point that we came up with, this business of how you prioritize services. One of the things that has come very clearly in all the presentations was the wealth of data that has been produced. And the GIS and other techniques allow you to analyze this and layer it one upon the other. I would like to ask the colleagues in front of me how they might prioritize when there are conflicts and how they would see the way forward. And I'm not sure where to start. Should we start at the far end? Unfairly?
Hello, Steve Alban, co-chair of the UK NEA. Well, I think it's an issue of scale, and at whatever scale you're looking at these things, you have to involve all the people with an interest in that particular place, because I think what we're realizing increasingly is that these are spatially specific issues often. So they may be quite small scale, they may be catchment, they may be larger. And then you have to get the scientific evidence presented in a way that people can see what the trade-offs really are, what they will gain in one ecosystem service and what they will lose in another, and have this deliberative process. You may want to have a projection into the future through various scenarios, exploring those, what it would mean, and then a decision-making process has to take place. But as long as you've been able to explore the evidence and can have a audit trail of how you've arrived at your decisions, I think there's no sort of right or wrong, but it's a process that as many people as possible who have relevant inputs and interests should take part in.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else want to follow this on how you might make final decisions?
Right. He just passed the mic to me. I would agree with Steve. And all I would add to that, I think this idea of place-based assessments is really important. You know, if it's a deliberative process, you've got to involve people around the place that's, you know, sets the context. The point I would like to add, though, is the challenge for the scientific community is how we generalize from that and share that experience. And it seems to me we've got the place-based bit right now. You know, we're focusing down and targeting where the priorities are. But we need to find ways of sort of constructing socially robust decisions and sharing that decision-making with other people so they can build on that experience and make more robust decisions elsewhere.
But would you accept that there will be conflict?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
I would agree with what's been said, and I would just add to that, focus on outcomes. Focus on outcomes. Focus on the outcomes that you want to achieve.
From the floor, sir.
Yes, Ed. I know Ed's been waiting to get your point in all day, haven't you?
No, so I will modify exactly what I was going to say. Edward Maltby, maybe we're losing sight of the connection of all of this to the ecosystem approach. And I'd just like to offer a reminder that the first principle of the ecosystem approach, if we're following the convention on biological diversity, is that ecosystem management is a matter of societal choice. The key word is societal. In the original language, I drafted social, but some governments didn't like that. So societal was the outcome. And the value of that, of course, is it introduces a democratic or alternative process to determine what should be the priorities. Now, I see in Wales some fantastic evidence of major advances in deploying the thinking. And the setting up of Natural Resources Wales is an institutional advance. But the real challenge is that whilst Natural Resources Wales is taking care from different sectors within the natural environment, the real progress will be made with the engagement of sectors outside of that. Arguably, the major constraint in delivering the integrated and holistic approach that we're looking for to break away from business as usual is the sectoral organization of government. Since we can't change government easily, the next best thing is to have mechanisms of engaging with the health service, with industry, and with other facets of government in order to actually resolve that first question.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Any other comments from the floor?
Tony had a point on
thank you.
First one, I think. Gareth, thanks.
Thanks.
I was just going to agree, actually, with a colleague. I put up my measures of success for you to see, and we'll publish those. That is the way we will judge different options. We will look at which ones link to our measures of success, and the ones which offer best value to our customers, we will do. It's as simple as that, really.
Bridget.
Just Bridget Emmett. One thing that I haven't got straight in my head with all the place-based that Roy was talking about and many other and societal choices, so within each catchment or landscape or what have you, what choices do they have? But at the end of the day, our governments have signed up to national and international commitments, you know, greenhouse gas commitments, biodiversity, and when you integrate those across, and perhaps this has been covered in the policy arena, we've been over in the research room, thus the splitters, you know, how do we bring those two things together? That local place, societal choice, as Ed has just said, but we do have, and we did vote for them, some of us did, some of us didn't, the governments that we now enjoy, you know. So how do we bring those two things together?
I think that might be mine. What I didn't get to, I mean, I shouldn't probably, because we haven't published the white paper yet, but I will say a little bit about the plans for the legislation. The idea is we would have a power in relation to setting a direction of travel as Welsh Government. So in terms of there are overarching things that the sum total of the local activity needs to add back up to, we would set those and potentially some special priorities, but ideally we want it to emerge from those type of discussions. I mean, in terms of priority, and if we're going to go back to sustainable development principles, we're looking at win-win-wins wherever possible. And I think if we're focusing more on the underlying resilience, I think you're hopefully getting things that are working for more of the services, rather than trying technically to trade off individual services in a slightly difficult way. Although I appreciate that even within individual areas like biodiversity, there are choices about what you manage it for. And those are things where I think we'll have some very interesting societal discussions, I think.
So I just think my point is to manage expectations. When people say it's all about society, you choose what have you, there are going to be constraints, and we do need to make that clear when we're doing this. Otherwise, people say, I thought it was my choice, my landscape, and it's managing expectations. That's what I think I was getting at, sorry.
I agree with everything that's just been said. I think the only thing I would add, that I did make a point in my talk before, is if from an agricultural production point of view, which to me is a key ecosystem service, we decide in a particular area of the world that we will sacrifice production for some other ecosystem service, and yet there's still a demand for the food production, we're exporting that other potential pollutant load somewhere else. And from a societal point of view, it's complex, but we have to think, where do we draw the boundaries? Yes, we have national targets, but how do we reconcile this across food production over a wider space?
Fine, thank you all very much. I'm tempted to be rather naughty out there. I have a reputation for stirring things up at the end. Once upon a time, Liverpool built a very large reservoir in Tryweryn in order to produce water for Liverpool. And they drowned a valley, and they drowned a Welsh-speaking community, and they found, as a result of this, plenty of water for Liverpool, which Liverpool exports and I think makes some money out of. And I was born in Liverpool, by the way. And also there is a very fine recreational asset in the Tryweryn River for water sports. That's a classic example, it seems to me, of there are a number of ecosystem services in there. Financially, it seems to me, if you had it just financially, you would have to say it was a good investment, because I'm sure the water is worth a lot more than every lamb that's ever been produced in the Tryweryn Valley. In societal value, as a Welsh-speaking Welshman, it was a disaster. You know, I just bring that up as an example. And in Africa and in many parts of the world that I've worked as with the Centre of Arizona Studies, this was that the issue. We made ourselves very unpopular in refusing to support a dam on the river called the Kamadubi-Yobe, which ran into the north of Lake Chad. And the Nigerian government tried not to pay us for a long, long time. And finally we extracted them because we didn't give them the answer that they wanted for that particular service. It's a real problem. So I would say, so the reason the question too is, do we go beyond economy, and are there other, you talked about the societal values. I assume that is much more than economic assessment. Yeah. And so how would you define that term that you employed? How would you determine societal values?
Well, I wouldn't attempt to define it in strict terms, but it's all about having a robust approach to the constituency, the stakeholder engagement at whichever level or scale is appropriate to deal with the problem or issue at hand. I like to think in terms of problem sheds. I also like to think in terms of shifting baselines. The analogy to your example is, of course, the first major planning disaster of the Bronze Age, which converted mixed deciduous woodland to moorlands. And of course, these are the environments that we cherish so dearly today as national parks in Wales and in England. But they were disastrous to prehistoric communities who had to move down into heavier soils, which they were not well equipped to deal with. So there are shifting societal perspectives. And I'm not going to give you any easy definition of that. It's what is appropriate and fit for purpose for the application of this more integrated and holistic thinking.
That's a very, very good answer, thank you. I'm reminded the old professor of forestry in Bangor here would look out on the terrace at the Carneddau, which is a national park, and said that's the most degraded environments I know outside Ethiopia. And we call it a national park.
Oh, hello.
Let's just, there are, please.
Yes, Jenny Phelps from the Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group. We've actually been working for the last 10 years to produce an evaluated delivery framework that actually joins all this up together, that's being presented at a workshop at the Next Ecosystem Knowledge Network. It's called Integrated Local Delivery, and it has been researched and evaluated, and it may be of interest to some people looking for a delivery framework that joins together, working directly with communities and linking all the partners at a local level to deliver multi-objective strategic delivery that's led by communities, that supports communities in that involvement. So it will be at the next Ecosystem Knowledge Network workshops. Thank you.
And here and then the back. Sean at the back.
Yep. I'm glad you mentioned dams, because I published an ecosystem service study. I published quite a lot, but one was on the Pancheshwar Dam on the India-Nepal border. And what I was able to demonstrate with an ecosystem service analysis, not quantified, but all likelihood of impact, was the distributional impacts. And actually, politically, it's been dynamite, and the dam is not proceeding. Not my fault personally, but the study has been quite influential. Because if you look at the who wins, who loses out of piped water and wired power, sorry, who wins and who loses, you know, it just exposes the distribution of power, wealth. And this is what I want to pick out. It's not all about putting pound signs on stuff. It's putting value systems on the same table. That's the power. So I think we get a little bit sidetracked by trying to monetize everything. Monetization is simply about saying, is it big, small, positive, negative compared to everything else? And it's a matter of value systems, bringing them all together. can be very, very persuasive.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to talk about, when we're talking about prioritising services and this whole debate about economy and ecosystems, I think we have to find a way, as you were saying, about stakeholder engagement, but outside this room, how are we going to talk about the ecosystems approach to make it real to people, you know, in a plain English way, so that stakeholders, be they farmers, landowners, other stakeholders, even school children, can understand what we're talking about when we're saying the ecosystems approach, so that they can engage with us on all these debates in a meaningful way. So I just think it'd be interesting to hear the panel's thoughts about how we can make the ecosystems approach real for people outside of, you know, the hall today.
Yeah, I'll take that challenge. I have, of the pilot projects that I spoke about for those who are in this room, I was a project officer of the Bassenthwaite pilot, so I did a lot of talking to farmers and a lot of talking to the general public, and I did that with barely using the words ecosystem approach or ecosystem services. I would explain it afterwards and say, you know, we've talked about what this place does for you, what the environment of this place provides you with. And we did lots of exercises where we got people to identify what they got from there. And you can do that in language, it's possible. It's very, you know, you just have to use language that people understand. And people, you know, just asking people, what does this place provide for you? Or asking farmers, what does your management of this place supply in terms of public benefits? And people will list them off. People really do know, but it's just getting them to think about it. And it's very possible to do that, you know, without using technical language.
I have to say, I mean, in the discussions we've had cross-sectorally in terms of the work on this, I think we're going to use nature. I don't think we're going to use biodiversity or ecosystem services. I think just in terms of the keyword to communicate, that just seems so much better. But back, linking to the previous discussion, we do need to make sure this is a rich debate. It is about putting as much knowledge on the table of different kinds. So yes, distributional effects, a lot of what we're talking about is pretty progressive because it moves money up hills largely, but isn't necessarily the case. And I think the other thing is enriching the way people think about the environment. There is a tendency to think about what they know and what they've seen in their lifetime. I think, you know, maybe we don't have to go back to the Bronze Age every time, but that sort of sense that there are other periods of this landscape. One of the things we were talking about with colleagues was, at the moment we send out maps with the farming materials. We could send out quite a few quite old maps with those farming materials about how that land was in various periods, and just begin to start a richer dialogue about change, because we're not very good at change in the UK. I think it'd be fair to say we don't like it much. So that sense that these are living things that have been managed in very different ways in very different periods, even within recent memory, I think is really important.
Yeah. Just following up from that, to use a more recent example than Ed's, the whole issue about forestry in Wales, I think, is fascinating. Plynlimmon catchment set up 40 years to look at the trade-off between this massive forestation that we did after the Second World War to get wood security. You know, we needed wood, we wanted to grow our own, what have you, but the water, we're really worried that it was going to use up all the water out the reservoirs. You know, so set up research, did that. Now, you know, and then the whole thing moved on. You know, the idea was that land wasn't very productive anyway, we might as well go back to trees. Well, of course, they planted exotic trees, not native trees. And now, of course, we're thinking about, we've got a major in Wales, a forestation plan, but it's for carbon, you know, to some extent, and for biodiversity and for recreation. So that idea that how on earth can we envisage what we will need in 50 years' time, or how we will even appreciate that in 50 years' time, particularly for things like trees. You know, if they grow 50 years, 100 years, soils take decades, millennia to develop. And I just really worry that, you know, decisions that we make today, are we really thinking, yes, about the resilience, but just this time dimension to have people understanding where we've come from and the time it takes to restore. And just as diverse biodiversity, I just think diversity, keep our options open, because let's not be too arrogant about we think we know where we're going. Because if anything, you go to the past, we've been rubbish at it, frankly, of thinking about where we're going to go to. Who would have thought we'd be here now in terms of technology and that trees are important for carbon rather than fuel? I think we need to have a little bit of humility in thinking about keeping some things open and flexible. Rant over.
Thank you.
I actually really think that point is tremendously important. And I think one of the things that would be really nice to bring into the debate about ecosystem management or services, call it what you will, is the question of why we're doing this and what are the limitations within which we have to think about this. You know, one reason we're talking about these kinds of issues is because we have things like climate change, we have acidification of water, we have resources that are becoming more and more scarce, and we're living in a more and more global world. So I think one of the things we really need to be thinking about is how do we link this discussion of the ecosystem services with the larger discussion of what are the limitations within which we have to live. And I think one of the things that's been very nice about this last day of really rich talks is seeing what can happen when you focus in on a local activity and you bring the people on board to thinking about those very important questions of how do we make our natural environment something that we can live with and live in and live from, but still maintain it for future generations. And I think one thing that would be very nice to think about is what are the lessons we learn from the cases we've heard about today. If we were to take a couple of the examples and bring them into a European or a global context, what would be the lessons we'd like to draw out of our stories and presentations? I think there's a lot of rich things that we learned today, and it'd be nice to think about how do we bring those to a larger discussion. And one last comment. You had mentioned that conflict is not the right word, that it's partnership. But I'd like to say it's both. Because a democracy is actually all about conflict. It's managing conflict, and it's thinking about how do we develop moving things forward, understanding that there are differences of thinking about things. So I agree very much on partnership, but I think conflict has its role as well.
Any other comments on that? Please. Oh, you're first, yeah, and then second.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking that we were exploring what from the first one, how do we prioritize services and there are conflicts, and what the ecosystem approach means. And I think a lot of people have started to see the ecosystem approach or the behaviors that are encapsulated in that, even if they don't label them the ecosystem approach, as a tool to deliver sustainable development. But it doesn't give you the right answer when you apply it. What it does, I think, and we see from a lot of the case studies, is it expands people's horizons, be it spatially or temporally, to look at the intended and unintended consequences. And then you make your decision. You can make it purely on a political whim, or on who shouts loudest, or on a business demand. But at least on the table, you've got a lot more recognition of intended and unintended consequences. And that's one of the big differences, I think, when you look historically, because societal choices have changed partly on the expanded recognition of the, of intended consequences, but on learning from the unintended consequences that came before.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Pete Frost. I'd like to drag the discussion down to the nitty-gritty. I work in urban ecosystems, and I've been hearing all the amazing things that people have been talking about today, and I was thinking, following on from Dŵr Cymru Welsh Water, what we we're faced with a massive set of budget cuts for local authorities in the coming couple of years and probably beyond. And they always say, well, the only thing we can do is statutory services, which is shorthand for things like education. So green infrastructure, delivering ecosystem services in urban areas is going to take an increasingly less and less part. So I'm thinking a quick win that we could do, which doesn't even need to wait for an environment bill or a planning bill, would be to publish planning policy guidance, or in Wales we call them technical advice notes, on green infrastructure in urban areas. I think that'd be a really quick win, and I'm wondering what our speakers think about that.
I would completely support you. I think we should also understand, I was reading in the Times yesterday, I think it was the chairman of Ofwat, our economic regulator, made it very, very clear that our bills will be coming down, and that means we'll have less money than we have had in the past. So water companies, and Cymru Welsh Water is, we don't have a money tree to go to that I can pick £20 notes off, sadly. We're working within ever more constrained budgets, just like the local authorities are. Having said that, some of the solutions that I talked about, are either potentially or actually cheaper than the hard engineering options that we look at. And when we co-fund them with other bodies, they're dramatically cheaper, and our money goes a lot further than it otherwise would do. So we certainly need to be ever more efficient about what we're doing, but I completely support your point. Having the right regulatory structures in place and technical guidance notes and so on and so forth makes life a lot easier. So I definitely support that.
Not sure about a TAN, because they seem to take a while, but it does strike me that one of the things that most local authorities could do is stop trying to remove biodiversity from most of their public areas. They must be spending an awful lot of money on cutting the grass really short, planting the wrong things, etc., etc. I mean, if they want to save money, just as they found it's a good idea to switch off some lights, and find that's also good for carbon, I think really good to look at the way they manage the public and highway estate, because it costs a lot of money. It's pretty negative, and if we, there's a real opportunity here for the transformation of public realm in urban areas with the combination of investment in green infrastructure, the SUDS work, and the rest, if we can get this right. I have to say, though, in the public discussions I've had about this, what you tend to find is that it is the general public that are writing in, complaining that the grass has not been cut to within an inch of its life. So we may need to do a little bit more involvement in terms of people's expectations. We seem to have developed a nation that wants things to be very, very neat. Nature not too keen on neat, really.
To add to that, last year in Scotland we published an information note on an ecosystems approach and green infrastructure, aimed at primarily at local authorities and community planning partnerships, and that's on our Scottish Government website. It's a bit early to say yet how well it's worked, Pete, but it's certainly out there, and we're hoping that people are reading it and taking note of it.
Time is moving on. I was wondering if people want to move on. We've had a little bit about change to designations and the future of designations, because I think that's a very interesting topic. Whether the SSSI structures that were set up in the late 1940s are now fit for purpose. Matthew suggested they weren't. And if so, what type of purpose? We have a representative of JNCC here. And this is, as I recall, the formal responsibility of JNCC in law. How might that move on to a system which allows protection but also allows fluidity and allows for change in the future? Does anybody wish to comment on that?
At risk of your hearing my voice again, please permit my indulgence. This sort of conversation could not have occurred 20 years ago. We have really moved forward. And I think that the main point I'd like to make under this heading is that it has shifted concern and recognition of the importance of just protected areas to the much wider landscape. and the wider areas of farmland, of urban land, they're all special in different ways. And I think that the more we regard the whole set and look towards sound management of the collective, the more we will advance the well-being of communities and the economy as well as biodiversity.
Thank you. One of the things that you would notice if you travel around here is the way the boundaries of the National Park skirt the old slate mines. It's just, and the same in Derbyshire. So, you know, there's muck, there's brass, and here we have a national park at the back.
John Harold, Gwynedd. It struck me that the last two speakers both highlighted the Clean and Anglesey Fens project as one of the sort of flagships for this approach. And of course those sites are entirely based on statutorily designated SACs and SSIs. Those sites exist as something that can be built upon because they have been protected, because in spite of what some people have suggested, actually the nature conservation agenda has been successful in protecting the value of those sites across decades against the odds. So I just wonder how we will ensure that we have sites of sufficient value in the future to continue to build on in this way and to apply the ecosystem approach too.
Thank you very much. Matthew? Okay, oh, sorry, yeah.
I just wanted to touch on your comments about the SSSI mechanism, and I think it's a very useful example of how you need to be very, very careful with what you do with law. Because if you go back to the 1949 Act, which was based on a considerable amount of debate and discussion, looking at a whole range of different sorts of protected areas for different purposes, the SSSI mechanism was nothing more than a notice of whether something was scientifically interesting. Now, if we still had that, think what we could do with it and how we could use it as a foundation for all sorts of other things. But because it was there and it was local, we used it for other things, and then we built on it, and then we made it stronger, and then we turned it into a protective thing. But the actual foundation that started it was probably the wrong one for actually choosing those sites. So I just think we have to be very, very careful what we do with our law.
Thanks. I just wanted to suggest that maybe we should look to Scotland once again in terms of its national parks legislation and in setting up the primary legislation to have national parks, but having the designation of the boundaries below that primary level, which would allow more flexibility so that as time moves on and things that used to be outdoor factories like the slate mines become cultural heritage landscapes, you can treat them in a different way without the cost and the difficulties involved in securing primary legislation to bring them into a national park.
Right, thanks. It seems to me designations do two sorts of things. One is that they nail down and secure things in a way that other sorts of rules can't do. So it gives you a legal status. And I think in the context of supporting a lot of conservation via agri-environment schemes, those schemes are not secure. So actually it seems to me we need a system, even if we're trying to manage, as we should be, trying to manage the countryside in a much broader way, we need to nail it down. The other sort of thing that national parks do, I guess it goes back to the McEwen idea of green prints, is that they're at the cutting edge of innovation. So this is a dynamic system where, in a sense, somewhere has to be leading. And I guess we should be looking to the national parks to lead that process, and other areas of countryside management can follow. But we need to identify sort of leading edge technologies and change.
Totally controversial now. May I be totally controversial? Why don't we come to the point where we get away from protected areas? Okay? No trapless eyes, no SACs, no areas of outstanding national beauty, but we come to a holistic system when it comes to our marine protected areas, our marine SACs, European marine sites. If we get certain activities under control, the rest of the marine environment is going to be protected. Let's get away from this network of, bits here and there and there. Why don't we do something holistic? Okay?
Well, indeed, I'd like to follow up on that point, actually, because I'd also like to be slightly controversial, and it seems to me that the sort of process of designation is I can see the advantage of it. I mean, it gives you a degree of legal certainty, and that certain sort of cultural assets are going to be protected. But I think really the point is, what are the ecosystem services in there, and how does this all tie together? And certainly from my particular perspective, more recently working with the Environment Agency, I can see the real traps here. Because there do come sort of choices in terms of land management. Obvious one is, do we continue or not to continue to drain agricultural land, for instance? Well, one of the reasons why we often continue to drain agricultural land is to protect designated sites. But of course, in doing so, we actually deny the possibility of the creation of new habitat elsewhere. So one of the points about this really is by sort of providing these little sort of spots of protection, we are actually in sometimes losing the possibility of change and improvement actually in the working of our own society, of our own environment really. So I think there's a danger there. And so that's a comment really, but I'd be interested in people's reactions to that point.
Thank you very much. I think we'll take two more. It's almost 5:30. Matthew and one other, and otherwise you'll have no time for my summary. No, and another one, yes. If you're all enjoying yourselves, we can stay here. No problem at all. Matthew, and then the lady behind you.
As I was reported as being anti-designation, I feel I should come into this. I share the designation is a hugely emotive issue because designations have been really important and they've done really valuable things. But fundamentally, I go back to the original legislation as has been said, and effectively what we did in the 40s, we decided there were some things we were going to protect for nature, and at that time it was going to be NNRs that was going to be the principal thing. SSIs were a temporary factor, which have grown subsequently, as Linda said. We were going to decide that there was going to be agriculture and the Agricultural Act at the same time, put the system in for agriculture, and that was where we let rip. We had a forestry, we basically, and then we had town and country planning, which was the other bits on the map. And we completely lost the systemic material there. And what the risk of it is that it has allowed the idea that if you have protected areas, you don't need to worry about the rest. And that, for me, is the real problem with an approach focused on protected areas. It's not that there's a problem with having protected areas, it's what it implies for what isn't within the red line. And that, for me, is critical. And if you look at what we're trying to achieve, yes, some of these things need certainty of outcome for investment. There are other mechanisms with which you can do that. There's bonds, there's other things that you can give long periods. You want to incentivize people to do things. What I hear from the land community is that a lot of this is a disincentive to improve land towards biodiversity, just in case it's going to be designated and they'll lose their ability to have value from it. So we really need to look at this much more as part of the delivery of a whole and think about how we use all the tools to deliver this. These things were not designed to do what we're now trying to do with them, and I think we owe it to ourselves to look fundamentally at how they need to change in order to do that. I'm not talking about getting rid of it, but we really need to look quite closely at how we use it.
Hi, Katie Medcalf. I completely agree with Matthew, and I think what I've found when trying to map ecosystem services in the terrestrial environment is quite often our designated sites are very, very valuable in all the ecosystem services because they're the most resilient, because they've been managed so well over so long. And what you find in the marine environment, particularly thinking of the Indian Ocean and the US naval base on, I can't remember, Chagos, yeah? That marine environment, they think, is providing the resources for the fishing of a good bit of the Indian Ocean. Because it's such a pristine environment and is so well managed, it actually is acting as a nursery stock for everything to go out of it. So yes, we don't want to have little piecemeal things protected and a desert between, but on the other hand, the piecemeal things that we're protecting scientifically are giving us the resilience that we need. So it's looking holistically.
Thank you very much. I think I'll draw it to a close there. And can we all thank all the speakers at the front here? My concluding remarks will be very brief indeed, because you all want to go home. 2 anecdotes. Once upon a time when I worked at CCW, we had the great privilege to go to Gwynedd House to meet Mr. John Redwood, who was then the Secretary of State for Wales. And he greeted us with the comments, you've got, I think it was 876 SSIs in Wales, why do you want any more? So I remember that particular interview extremely well. And the other thing I should think, which follows up from what has been said, I remember being at a conference in Perth in Australia on Australian soil conservation with the land care people, and 1/3 of the audience were farmers. They were actually participating in the conference, and they were farmers there, concerned about the state of their own land and the degradation and the alkalinization and the solidification of that land. Are there any farmers here? Congratulations. Are you a small farmer or a big farmer? A weedy farmer, right. There is this issue that's been brought up several times about how we engage with the people in the countryside and the urban population as well, as you said, Keith. It's very important that we do this, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. I'd like to leave you with 2 thoughts. I think we also need another conference. This conference was about, the title was Managing Ecosystems for People, Nature and the Economy. And I was so inspired by the Dŵr Cymru Welsh Water presentation that I think we need a conference managing the economy for people, nature and ecosystems. And I think that that would be an equally valid view to take in the future and would be very useful. I'd like to leave you with 2 little puzzles to think about when you go home. There is a major bone of contention in Wales at the moment, in mid-Wales, and that's wind farms. And wind farms are supposedly a source of energy, clean, renewable energy for the communities. But it is offending the local population hugely. And managing that conflict, you said that there are conflicts, and how you manage that conflict seems to me a very important issue for ecosystem services, because I think otherwise people really feel you are not exactly deceiving them, but not actually coming clear and straight with them as to what is involved. And I suspect there are lots of issues like this around the renewable energy program. This came up, Bridget referred earlier to the afforestation. She was on the committee that recommended it, Bridget, as I recall, that going up from 300,000 to 400,000 hectares. And the progress has in fact been extraordinarily slow. And it turns out that not everybody is enamored of the idea of increasing the forestation of Wales to about 30%. So, you know, always there are these conflicts. And I do feel this, the only way to start resolving them is to inform the public a great deal more than we're doing. And that we mustn't be in a position that we're talking to ourselves as an audience, but we must be talking out to other people. And with those very few thoughts, I would like to thank you all for here, and I understand that our President wants to come up and say a word. There's a microphone here, madam.
This one's perfect. I'm here to be Santa Claus. First, I wanted to say thank you very, very much to Natural Resources Wales and to Bangor University for agreeing to co-host this conference of the European Environment Advisory Councils. As I mentioned this morning, this is something we do on a yearly basis, and it's a wonderful opportunity to learn about the work that's going on in different parts of Europe. I think today we got some good insights to some of the exciting work that's going on here in Wales and in England. And I think we'll have a lot to take back with us because of that. So many, many words of thanks. And one of the things we always know when there's a conference is these conferences don't happen when the people who we don't have up on stage aren't there. So there's two people in particular I'd like to say thank you to. One is standing back there, Rosie Anthony. Would you like to come up here for a minute? And this is where the Santa Claus part comes in. I get to reach into my bag and give you some nice chocolates to say thank you. Rosie was one of the people who made this whole conference happen, organizing it, and went way beyond what she had to make this conference so great and wonderful. Thank you. And Sean Russell, who we have seen a little bit on the stage today, he was also getting to give speeches that he didn't think he was going to have to give. So you two get some chocolate. But wait. Before. I am absolutely convinced there are people that I'm also supposed to be thanking, but I'm not sure who they are. So I'm going to give you the responsibility of passing those out to everybody else. So once again, thank you, everybody. It's been a terrific day, and I wish you all well.
I've got to just give us some final notes about the dinner this evening. Thanks, everybody. I'm just going to put up a slide about the arrangements for the dinner and the field trip tomorrow.